Hey, this is Mike Diercksen from Proactive, and you're listening to Building by Podcast. Tune in as we spotlight our guest, Ken Simonson, Chief Economist at AGC. Our episode is focused on the 2024 August Construction Outlook Report, as well as the annual Workforce Shortage Survey. For more information on this episode and others, please check out the Building Bite at www.buildwithproactive.com.
Welcome to the Building Bite Podcast, a podcast for construction contractors, owners, and insurance professionals where you'll hear from the experts about key topics to help you be successful. I'm Chris Epps, a Vice President at Proactive, and I'm joined here with my co-host Mike Diercksen, our Manager of Marketing and Business Development. Today we welcome back Ken Simonson, one of our favorite people to talk to. Ken is the Chief Economist with the Associated General Contractors of America, or better known as AGC. Ken, how are you today?
Doing fine, thanks.
Wonderful. Mike, how about yourself?
Doing great, Chris. Always a pleasure to have Ken on the podcast. So excited for today's conversation.
Absolutely. Well, today we're lucky enough to discuss Ken's most recent publication, which is the August 2024 U.S. Construction Outlook Report, which has a sneak peek at the 2024 Annual Workforce Shortage Survey. Ken, before we dive in, kind of at a high level, what would you say is the most striking thing or maybe most informative thing to come out of the survey in the 2024 report?
Sure. Let me give you a little background on the survey. This is one that AGC of America has been conducting for 12 years now. We do it in partnership with our 89 state and local chapters. So it goes out to all of our 28,000 member companies. That's the general contractors, specialty trade contractors, and then suppliers of equipment, goods, and services. And this year we were fortunate to get almost 1,500 responses. Survey was conducted from just after July 4th week up until just about 10 days ago. So these are really fresh results. And to answer your question, I think the most striking thing is that the labor shortages seem to have gotten worse, if possible. This has been a chronic theme that it's hard to fill positions, and this year there has been some shifting around, but on net, it's even harder than it has been in the past, certainly for many of the craft positions and also for some of the salaried positions. That was a bit of a surprise to me, since I know many other labor market indicators beyond construction show that the labor market has really been cooling off quite a bit. In fact, there's actually some concern out there that the broader economy may go into recession or at least stop adding jobs.
Well, without further ado, let's dive into that, Ken. And for our audience listening today, if they're looking to follow along with the report, you could check that out on our website at www.buildwithproactive.com. Without further ado, Ken, I'll turn it over to you. If you want to share your screen, we'll be able to run through the reports.
All right, great. This shows what's happened to total non-farm payroll employment in green. That's the headline figure that you hear about usually on the first Friday of each month. So we'll be getting a new report on that the Friday after Labor Day. And you can see that the year-over-year growth in jobs is still continuing, but it has slowed down a lot. Going back to the left side, you see in January 2022, the economy was adding 5% to its workforce every month. And that has steadily dwindled to about a 1.5% growth rate. Now, that's still pretty good when you see that population is only growing at about 0.5%. But nevertheless, there is reason to see that that may head into negative territory over the next year. But the story is really different with construction, in particular, non-residential construction, what AGC members do, every type of construction other than single family. That has remained steady. That red line is continuing to increase at close to a 4% rate, and it's only tapered off a little bit over the last 2 years. Even residential employment, with big bumps on first a big drop in single-family home building, and more recently, a lot of multifamily projects completed. Nevertheless, total residential construction employment has continued to rise at a faster rate than total non-farm payroll employment. So the construction industry would seem to be in good shape in terms of being able to add jobs. I can also show that this is not just a one-off, but it's happening all over the country. We get data each month on the number of jobs added state by state, and this comes out with a bit of a lag, a month-long lag, but you can see that 35 states added jobs from June of 2023 to June of 2024, and consistently we've seen a job growth in construction. This is strictly construction employment, has been going up in anywhere from 35 to 39 states. The ones in pink have had declines. They do move around somewhat. I would say there's more weakness in the Northeast and the Northwest, Oregon and Washington. But by and large, the country is adding jobs in most locations.
Yeah, Ken, it even appears that I would say modest negative figures there aren't nearly as large on the aggregate as the positives in terms of just the percentage points in the positive side of that column with the green states.
Good point, Chris. Yes, we used to see some pretty scary negative figures for some of the states, but even the laggards, they're hanging pretty close to where they were a year ago. Now, this slide shows why things aren't as rosy as they look in those first two. The number of people hired, this is from a series the Bureau of Labor Statistics calls Job Openings and Labor Turnover Survey, or JOLTS. And again, it comes out with a lag of about a month compared to that National Employment Report. And there are three key series here. This is a video, if you will, of what's been happening in the month of June each year since this series started in 2001. The red line shows that the number of people hired has stayed in a fairly narrow range in June year after year for more than a decade. It's staying within that 300,000 to 400,000 band. The only exception was in 2020 when there was that huge rebound from the tremendous shutdown that happened at the beginning of the year. But the latest figures, 328,000 people hired in June of 2024. That is down from June of 2023, but it's still right in the range that we've seen over the last decade and a half almost. The blue line shows the number of job openings on a single day, the last day of June in each of those years. And as you would expect, in most of the time period, there were far fewer job openings on that one day than there were people hired in the whole month. The blue line was way below the red line. But in the last 4 years, those things have played leapfrog with each other. And while in 2024 we did have some drop off in the job openings, it's still pretty close to the number of people hired. So the implication is that contractors wanted to hire twice as many people as they were able to bring on board. Finally, on this slide, we have the number of layoffs. And if layoffs jump, that suggests that companies don't have need for workers in the near future. It is always hard to recruit and retain workers, so they don't let them go unless there's a real problem. And the problem months showed up in 2007 to 2011. That's when we had the housing shut down and then the global financial crisis. But you can see that the number of layoffs has trended very low in the last few years. It's almost at a record low. So even though the number of hires dropped a little bit in the latest year, the fact that layoffs are so low says contractors still want to hang on to the workers they have. Well, let me transition from that to talk about what our survey found. As I said, we had almost 1,500 members report on their working conditions, their demand for workers. 94% of the firms said they had a job opening at the end of June, and that was for craft workers, and 79% had an opening for salaried workers. So it's certainly consistent with what we've been hearing for years and seeing in this chart, that job openings are still running very hot. Of the firms that had an opening for craft workers, 94% said it was hard to fill those positions. And similarly, for ones who had openings for salaried workers, 92% said those jobs were hard to fill. For the most part, they said they were even harder, or at least as hard as they had been the year before. We really dug into this. We asked about 18 different craft positions and 18 different salaried positions. For every one of the craft positions, at least 60% of the firms that were looking to hire said it was hard to do so. The hardest by a small margin, mechanics and pipe fitters and welders, but many other crafts, close to 3/4 or even more than 3/4 of the firms that were looking said it was hard to fill. Now, on the salaried side, generally those percentages weren't quite as high, but firms looking for superintendents, 83% of them said those jobs were hard to fill. And estimating personnel and project managers and supervisors, also extremely hard to fill.
Yeah, Ken, we've kind of heard about this too. We recently had an episode where we featured Nick DeMonte and Tim Nelson over at the International Training Fund, and we've talked about the fact that federal officials spend 4 times as much with programs encouraging a 4-year college degree rather than trade schools, particularly with respect to craft labor here. Outside of reallocating some of those funds, are there other ways you see construction industry and/or government coming together to kind of course correct? I mean, this looks like it could potentially be a continuing problem with demand outpacing supply of labor, but are you seeing any activity to sort of course correct there?
Well, our firms and our chapters, our 89 local and state AGC chapters, along with AGC of America, working very hard to try to get that 4-to-1 ratio that you mentioned equalized, to get more money from the federal and state and local governments, from school districts, to go into career and technical education. And so we do find that many of the firms say that they are coordinating or cooperating with the school districts and with local workforce agencies. So that is one of the major approaches that they are taking. They are also working internally to upgrade their own training programs. Many firms are now spending on training and professional development. 42% of our respondents said that they were doing that. More than 1/4 of the firms have increased their use of learning programs that use things like the Zoom and Teams platforms that we're on now. These are ways, of course, of connecting better with younger people who are so comfortable with all kinds of technology and may not see that construction is at that leading edge. But certainly, I think there's more that the industry can do, particularly in cooperation with government at all levels, to get the word out that construction not only has exciting new tools, but that it pays well. And let me segue, if I might, to what's going on with the pay situation. This chart shows, again, 3 different series. The blue and the black lines track what's going on in pay for what are called production and non-supervisory workers for 2 segments of construction. The blue line tracks that pay measure that the Bureau of Labor Statistics calls average hourly earnings for employees who aren't supervisors in the heavy and civil engineering side. So that would be craft workers and also office workers who aren't supervisors. And the black line shows the same thing for non-residential building firms. And both of those lines have stayed, again, quite steady. You can go all the way back to 3 years ago. In August of 2021 is when that black line first hit 5% as a year-over-year rate of increase. And just a month or 2 later, same thing for the heavy and civil engineering firms. And they've been continuing to raise pay at a 5% rate or more. Meanwhile, in the broader economy, again, pay raises have slowed down from 6% a couple of years ago to more like 4%. So the industry realizes that while we may offer cool tools like drones and robotics and a lot of software that you don't see elsewhere, pay is still important, and the industry is continuing to put in those large pay increases.
Yeah, and Ken, something that struck me with the survey results that we kind of took a look at earlier, and some of the largest shortages are with estimators, superintendents, project managers, architects, engineers, positions that typically take years to train but are high-paying positions. Is there a direct correlation between those positions and the responses that you're getting from the surveys, where some of these applicants are just not qualified for the work at this time?
Yes, sadly, when we asked our firms what is the problem in bringing people on board, a majority said that at least some of the applicants they're getting just aren't qualified. 62% of the firms said that that was a problem that they were
Hmm.
facing. And 50% of the firms said that people didn't have the right certificates or documentation needed to get that job. We also saw a substantial percentage say that people couldn't pass a drug test. 37%
Hmm.
of the respondents said that was an issue. And then, kind of a post-pandemic thing, there are people who can't get transportation, and that's certainly important where you have remote or difficult to reach job sites or moving around from one place to another. You can't count on catching the same bus every day to get to your
Hmm.
job. So that's an issue. And then finally, also as a post-pandemic issue, there are people who may be stuck needing flexible hours that just
Yeah.
aren't possible on an on-site construction job.
Mm. So it's almost as opposed to saying it's a true labor shortage in the sense of just there's not enough people. It's maybe the more refined is a qualified labor shortage, right? That seems to be one of the big drivers here.
That's right. We have to be able to get the word out that construction does offer great opportunities, both good pay to begin with and advancement. It's not just dirty, dead end, dangerous work, but a
Hmm.
lot of sophisticated tools, both mechanical and software. But beyond that, you have to have people who have the skills to step into those jobs. And that's where we think government has been falling down for a long time, and
Hmm.
that huge imbalance in how much goes toward career and technical education. Well, let me talk also about a good news story here. That's what's happened with materials cost. The red
Hmm.
line shows we had over a 20% year over year increase in the cost of items that go into construction. This would be all materials and services such as design and trucking services. And then things really started to cool off after the last spike, once Russia invaded Ukraine in the spring of 2022 was when we saw the last jump. For the rest of 2022 and much of 2023, the price increases were less and less. We even had a few months where prices on balance were lower than they had been in the same month the year before. Well, this year, yes, inflation has returned, but very mild, only running at 1% or less throughout 2024 so far. And I've really gotten more optimistic. I was expecting we would continue to see things heat up, but they haven't. And so I think we'll wind up the year with materials costs pretty close to where they were at the end of 2023. That's not to say everything is perfect on materials. While most of our survey respondents no longer rate materials costs or supply chain issues as a problem, we did have 41% of them say that they see big supply chain issues with transformers and switch gear. And there are about a quarter of the firms also seeing problems with materials or components for HVAC systems and some other selected items. So while the picture is better overall on materials, not everything is working great yet. Here's an example of how there's still some volatility. While, as I mentioned, very little increase in the costs overall, the top line here shows that those inputs, the materials and services used in highway and street construction, went up less than 12% in the latest, less than 1% in the latest 12 months. And similarly, the bid price that contractors say they would charge to put up a new building just went up about 1%. But we're seeing big swings, both positive and negative, on some key inputs, such as the copper and brass mill shapes. Steel mill products have been heading down throughout this year at very steep rates, but diesel fuel has swung in both directions. The last few weeks, these figures were collected in mid-July. For the last 6 weeks, diesel prices have dropped a lot. So I think when we get the August producer price index report, we will see better news. But nevertheless, things are still volatile in some areas. Let's switch to what's going on with construction spending. This shows that from June of 2023 to June of 2024, total construction spending went up 6%. And most of these bars were in the green, meaning that there was growth from 2023 to 2024. The one standout is data centers. You can see 63% increase in just 12 months. Now, data centers used to be included in the office category without being separately identified. The Census Bureau, which puts out these numbers on the first business day of each month, they still are including data centers and offices, but at least they're showing them as a subcategory. And so I've taken out the data center piece, and it turns out, as you would expect, given all the headlines about
Hmm.
empty offices, that office construction is down 12%. The other negative is on what census defines as commercial. Now, that's a term that gets used a lot of different ways. For the Census Bureau, it means warehouse, retail, and farm construction, and that's been down also at double-digit rates. We had a huge boom in warehouse construction in the first 2 years after the pandemic, but then Amazon pulled the plug on a lot of projects in the spring of 2022. Other retailers have followed suit. And so warehouse is now one of the worst performing categories. Retail, spotty, as office workers have stayed away from those places where they used to go to lunch or do errands in the middle of the day. The retail in those office districts has been closing. But to the extent that people are working from home, they may actually have a little more time to run errands during the day. So local retail, suburban retail, that has actually been a positive market.
Was going to say, with regards to people working from home, I'm sure the data centers, it's a big component of it, right? The need for extra capacity and space and infrastructure from a technology perspective. These companies are probably looking to expand their presence with more data centers to accommodate the amount of people and connectivity that they're having.
Yes, in fact, let me skip all the detail here just to show you it is a mix of things in the black, meaning positive, with some subcategories in the red. But let me show again how much data centers have been just not just growing, but accelerating. This line gets
Hmm.
steeper and steeper. It's just incredible. And going forward, I don't think it's going to turn negative. I can't imagine it compounding at a 63% rate for another year, but nevertheless, every month we get announcements of new data center projects that seem to be bigger than the last one and in new locations. So data centers really are springing up all over the country, and I think this will be the leading growth market through 2025. To go on to what else I think will be positive or negative, I expect further growth in manufacturing, although that is definitely cooling off. In the last month or so, we've seen announcement after announcement of auto manufacturers that are canceling or slowing down or scaling back the plants they had announced to build electric vehicles and the batteries that go with them, other components. Nevertheless, I think there's still going to be growth in manufacturing as more companies try to bring production back to the U.S., either to get away from conflict areas, potential or actual conflict, or to shorten supply chains, or to qualify under the Build America, Buy America Act. So data centers and manufacturing, two strong growth categories, and then power construction, a lot of solar fields, transmission lines, and utility scale battery storage. And then fourth, we've been hearing about the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act for almost 3 years, yet not that much money has actually turned into contracts. However, I think the year to come will see a big bump up in infrastructure projects, not just a highway. We're already seeing a lot of airport projects, a lot of water and sewer projects, hopefully more build out of broadband internet. So there are four major categories that should be growing, and I think that will offset what I expect will be continued downturn in multifamily, warehouse, and office construction.
Well, Ken, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. We typically like to leave our audience with three key takeaways from the conversations that we have. And if there were three big components that you would want the audience to take away from today's conversation, what do you think those three should be?
Well, I think first of all, both the AGC workforce survey that we had 1,500 companies answer, and almost universally they said they have job openings and they're hard to fill, that story is going to continue to be the dominant one for firms. Second, there are still a lot of opportunities coming forward, even as other people think the economy is slowing down and is at risk of inflation. Specifically, data centers, incredible. Manufacturing plants continuing to pop up in different industries, many types of infrastructure projects and power projects, particularly solar and then the battery storage for when power is generated and not ready to be used. So those are all growth opportunities. And then third, I think that the costs are going to stay relatively tame in the year ahead, and I don't expect big supply chain issues outside of transformers and switchgear. Unfortunately, everybody needs those, so do plan on having longer and perhaps uncertain completion times, but other materials should be available.
Fantastic. Ken, thank you for chatting with us again today. Always a pleasure. We appreciate you keeping us in the know and giving us some insight into what to expect in the near term going forward. If our listeners want to hook up with you and have questions following the podcast, where can they find you? What's the best way to get a hold of you?
Well, they can see a lot of stuff, including details from our survey at agc.org, and they're welcome to email me at ken.simonson, simonson, at agc.org.
Fantastic. Well, very much appreciated. Thank you for taking the time again to join us today. I know you got a busy schedule, so we'll let you get back to it, but thank you again.
You're welcome. Glad to be with you again.
Thanks, Ken.
Thank you for listening to The Building Bite. This podcast has been brought to you by Proactive. Check us out on thebuildingbite.com, where you can subscribe to our newsletter and follow us on social media for all future The Building Bite news and updates. You can also find us on your favorite apps, including Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, and Amazon. If you have ideas for episode topics that we should cover on the show, or you know somebody who would be a perfect guest, let us know at connect@thebuildingbite.com.